Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to start by thanking WavEC for the invitation to be moderating this panel. Also, salute the Secretary of State and also the Ambassador of Spain. We are going to have a panel regarding the perspectives of floating offshore wind and the industry in the Iberian region. The panel will be structured in two initial presentations, the first one by Carmen María Tortosa from IDAE, and the second one from our Director of Energy Services from DGEG, Engineer Filipe Pinto. After that, we will have a debate with a couple of questions regarding the sector and the challenges that we are facing, and we will be with us Adrian de Andrés, Vice President of Iberblue Winds, José Pinheiro, Country Manager for Southern Europe of Ocean Winds, Pablo Alcón Valero, Offshore Director of Capital Energy, and Ricardo Rocha, Offshore Wind Technical Director for BayWa. So I would kindly ask Carmen, please, to go on stage.
Buen día, buenos días a todos. Good morning to all of you. First of all, on behalf of IDAE, I would like to thank the organization of this event to invite IDAE to this seminar, and also I want to thank you for the opportunity given to expose briefly the roadmap for offshore wind and marine energy in Spain. Perhaps many of you don't know what is IDAE. IDAE is the Institute for Diversification and Saving on Energy that will belong to the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. Our institute is the instrument in Spain for the decarbonization policy implementation and to carry out the national renewables and energy efficiency plans. In my speech, I will outline the Spanish strategy for offshore renewables, taking as the most immediate horizon this decade until 2030, but without losing the perspective of the ocean renewables energies are strategic. And also their contribution to the objectives of the decarbonization and also at an industrial level of generating economic activity and employment in Spain that can only grow in prominence and relevance for more distant horizons such as 2040 and 2050. In these times, the energy dependency in Spain, in Portugal and Europe is one of the issues in front page. Society is suffering more than ever its effects, as all of you know, and in this context, it's important to remember that Spain has more than an energy plan. It has a long-term decarbonization strategy composed of a regulatory package and a battery of tools on different fronts that are aligned with the European strategy framework. But it will take time. That is why we are in the energy transition. This on-screen infographic from the long-term decarbonization strategy graphically shows the pathway committed to until 2030 and set by Spain up to 2050. In the first decade, until 2030, energy savings and efficiency, the development of self-consumption and local energy communities, consumers' involvement and promotion citizen participation will be used as levers. It will be the decade of significant model changes in sector-intensive in fossil fuel consumptions, such as transportation, due to the growing use of electricity vehicles. All this supported by the development of renewables energy, where the ocean energy could be a complement of the onshore energies, which will progressively replace other carbon-based fuel plants. Also, using new elements of mineability for the electricity system through storage, laying the foundation for the production with renewable energy green hydrogen and its use as a vector to electricity current thermal consumption. And from 2030 towards to continue on this path, seeking the asymptote of the climate neutrality until 2050. Regarding the National Energy Plan, Spain has a target for renewable electric generation that is expected to end 2030 with around 50 gigawatts of installed wind power capacity, which will be the sum of onshore and offshore wind. This represents almost doubling the current 26.5 gigawatts of wind power we have now. In addition, the plan includes a modest target for marine energy of 50 megawatts that is especially for demonstrators and pre-commercial devices for this strategy technologies beyond 2030. I would like to emphasize that the specific technological objectives of each technology, in this case for wind energy, are not considered bidding by the plan. The breakdown between the technologies presented in the PNIEC responds to current projection basis on the cost and assumptions considered in the model exercising. So the specific distribution by renewable technologies between 2021 and 2030 is floating and will depend in any case on the relative cost as well on the viability and flexibility on their implementation, so that the relative weight may vary with certain margins. So in short time, it will depend on how competitiveness and each technologies involves. Spain is taking necessary steps to consolidate its position as one of the leading countries on the path to decarbonize our economy. To this end, a package of regulation has been launched to make up the strategy framework for energy and climate in Spain, in which you can see in the slide in the first column a lot of them. Also, as an accelerating element of this energy transition, we have the plan for the recovery, transformation and resilience of the Spanish economy that represents an accelerating instrument for the energy transition to facilitate investments also in ocean energy and undertake the reforms required to different areas. And in parallel with our roadmap that I will tell you today, other complementary roadmaps and strategies are being developed to outline the opportunities and measures to be deployed to achieve the energy and climate objectives for 2030 and 2050. As you can see, we have a storage strategy, a hydrogen roadmap, the self-consumption, and also the marine renewable roadmap. So in this concept, with all the package I have shown you before in the before slide, and aligned with the European strategy of offshore renewable energy, the objective of the roadmap for the development of offshore wind and marine energy is to ensure the effective deployment of the offshore renewables in Spain, so that it contributes to meeting the country's energy, climate, environmental, and industrial objectives in a way that is compatible with other use activities in the marine environment. The recent published Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan, as I have already mentioned, represent an accelerated instrument for the energy transition to facilitate investment also in offshore renewables and undertake reforms required in different areas. In particular, our plan measures has 3 measures that affects to the offshore renewables energies that belongs to the component 7. One of these is measure related to necessary reforms of the regulatory framework, and another measure aimed at new investment in renewables and associated support. The objective of this measure is to foster the development to innovative renewables energies, between others, and it shall support renewable self-consumption and technologies that are not yet fully competitive. So these measures include a specific committed milestone and timetable for the fulfillment that are periodically monitored by the European Commission. So this slide summarizes the main question. Why now is the right time for the offshore wind development in Spain? It can be summarized in that, thanks to the technological advances associated with the floating offshore wind, now is where there are a better alignment of all necessary factors to take advantage of the opportunities that offshore wind represents in Spain in different areas. At technological level, the progress that the floating offshore wind has expected in recent years now allows access to sites farther from the coast, with the depths of up to 1,000 meters, when previously those areas with bathymetric heights greater than 50 or 60 meters were technically and economical and feasible. Now floating concepts, which are very well adapted to the characteristics of the Spanish continental self-marine areas with very high capacity factor, exceeding in sometimes 4,000 equivalent hours, thus a marine farm with the same installed power capacity could double the generation of a land-based farm. In addition, there are economic reasons due to the use of new construction assembly techniques, especially with the use of floating platforms, which have reduced the generation cost. On the other hand, there are also energetic reasons because it represents a renewable energy with a high capacity factor. And there are other socioeconomic reasons to support the industrial development of a strategic national sector with powerful agents already positioned in other international offshore wind markets. And also I would like to mention that the motivation of the environmental integration and coordination on the search of the intersectoral synergies boosted the new technical employment, especially in floating wind turbines, which managed to minimize potential environment impacts with respect to the techniques associated with projects presented more than a decade ago. This opportunity and motivation have risen the roadmap and described on it. So the roadmap has 4 objectives, as you can see in the slide, set in Spain for 2030, that there are 1, to make Spain a European benchmark for technical development in renewable energies in the offshore environment, especially for floating wind power. Also represents the objective of strengthening industrial leadership in Europe in the value chain of this energy, taking advantage of synergy with the country's leading industries, and also contains measures aimed at the characteristics required for the regulatory framework applicable to offshore renewables installations, wind in particular, for the early deployment, seeking clear and predictable regulation. In this sense, the document envisages that the regulation for the early deployment of renewable installations, particularly wind farms, will be based on 3 key elements. This is the spatial planning, grid connection, and business model. The business model understood as a remuneration mechanism for commercial wind farms based on competitive concurrence among interested developers. So these 3 key elements are particularly relevant due to the localization of the plants in the public domain. In terms of new power decommission up to 2030, the document envisages a range from 1 to 3 gigawatts for mainly floating offshore wind, and in the last column you can see the target for European and global power benchmark. So the roadmap contains 23 measures that are blocked in different groups, depending on the action line. The first line of action is addressing to reinforce, consolidate Spain as an European benchmark in new prototypes and solutions in ocean renewables technologies. For this, it focuses on several aspects, such as the strengthening of current testing platforms and the development of the new ones, the launch of support programs for technological development, and establish an agile and flexible framework to speed up the substitution of prototypes by a plug-and-play mechanism. This line of action also announced the launch programs of support, technical development, and new development of testing sites that allocates at least 200 million euros for the R&D in ocean renewables energy sector between now and 2023. The second action line contains measures to accompany and boost the value chain associated with the development of offshore renewables energy. They include, among others, port infrastructures for the construction, assembly, and export of components associated with marine renewables installation. On this point, I would like to mention that the role of the ports could play a test platform for technological development linked to the deployment of marine renewables energy, using their ports' waters for pre-commercial developments should they prove viable in the project by project analysis. The third action line for this roadmap contains several necessary measures to ensure a clear and predictable framework for the development of the offshore renewable generation in Spain. For example, the updating of the regulatory framework to ensure the orderly deployment of offshore renewables. In particular, regarding to the adequacy of this regulatory framework and the momentum to allow an orderly deployment of offshore renewables installation, with in particular, the roadmap establishes some basis elements that the procedure has to contemplate in order to be consistent with regulation in force while giving visibility and certainty to investments in the medium and long term. There are three key elements, as I have already mentioned, that are the spatial response, the competitive concurrence mechanism, and thirdly, the predictable economic retribution for the electricity generation of wind farms. So these three key elements are especially relevant to the location of the plants in the public domain. At this point, with this slide, I want to emphasize that the proper implementation of the roadmap measures require to keep in mind the social and environmental sustainability approach. Does this mean that for an environmental point of view, it has to contribute a better knowledge of the marine environment, its conservation status, the monitoring of climatic conditions and biodiversity, and from a social point of view, it must take advantage of the opportunity to integrate local economies and generate socioeconomic benefits in the environment, both in the generation of employment and by promoting collaboration action with the fishing community. For this sector, we consider that it is very important to keep in mind that the good practice of the first projects on this issue will allow us to gain allies and establish win-win models for future offshore wind developments. And finally, the last action line is regarding to the governance in this decade to 2030. That one of the measures is related to the implementation of the roadmap, the coordination with other plans, and the detection of good practice as a basis for continuous improvement in the energy transition. And there is another measure that considered to the review in 2025 of the challenge and the opportunities of the offshore renewables, updating measures and target beyond 2030. So here, this slide is to summarize what the measures and all the things that the roadmap consider. 23 measures in 4 blocks, and some of them contribute to fulfillment several milestones of the recovery transformation plan for Spain. And I am my speech concluding that the Spanish roadmap is the starting point. So now it's about implementing the measure as fast as possible to provide the answer that the sector demands. Thank you very much for your attention. Muito obrigado.
Carmen, thank you.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate here in the summit. The invitation that was made to the DGEG. I had my presentation made in Portuguese. Obviously, I will have to translate as we go along, but I will try to maintain the 15 minutes that were scheduled. So, regarding my presentation, what would be the focus would try to show the commitment regarding the energy transition, namely, and then focusing obviously on this theme of the offshore. Showing the legal framework and what has been changing and the latest developments regarding these issues. So, in terms of the national strategy plan, what we are trying to aim, obviously, it's the decarbonization objectives, but we are focusing a lot in this year decade. So, from 2020-2030, we are trying to put the main focus and development of these, trying to deploy all these technologies. For this, we have many national plans, namely the National Energy and Climate, which is published and coordinated by Direção Geral. We have the low carbon, which is implemented by APA, and the national plan of investments, and obviously also the hydrogen. All this being pushed by some investments like the resilience plan and the environmental fund and the Portugal 2030 investments, so we can push for this the implementation of these measures. Regarding the national plan, obviously a strategic document that tries to establish some milestones and some objectives. What we obviously in the main objectives, not only trying to push efficient measures, mobility, but in this aspect, trying to develop the renewable energy sources in terms of energy generation. Regarding these aspects, we have fulfilled what have been our objectives regarding 2020. Obviously, with our tradition in terms of implementing renewables, we are trying to push from much ambitious measures, although at this point we are already trying to review these objectives and trying to be a bit more ambitious regarding some other aspects in terms of European strategy, namely Repower EU. Regarding offshore, and some of you will fully understand this table. What we have foreseen for 2020 is about 30 megawatts, which is mainly the amount of capacity that is being installed in Viana do Castelo with the wind float. In 2025, we're trying to develop this site, namely in Vienna, and 2030 fully scale up the potential of the maritime cable that is being installed in Vienna. So if you look at this table, the numbers are very conservative. And as I told previously, we right now are trying to review these plans, namely regarding the offshore plan, because we're feeling that exploring these resources may be one which will generate a lot of potential. And obviously we are feeling this and already have some measures regarding the government, namely in implementing this offshore group that I will be talking later on. So regarding the implementation of measures, the implementation of many measures to get to the objective of 47% of introduction of renewable energy. But I would just want to show it that when we first thought regarding the offshore generating energy from offshore technologies, what has been foreseen from the time that was implemented the national plan was trying to focus from much later on, probably 2026, 27. But what we are feeling now, it's trying to to review all this strategy and pushing the development of this technology for much earlier on. So regarding what has been put in place regarding these strategies, these ideas, this vision, much has been made or modified in terms of the legal framework. So we have, and I will try to skip this very fast, because it was much more aimed for I don't guess I will be having much more time, but the main focus here is already we had some adjustments in 2019 regarding our legal framework to deploy and to adjust some legal mechanisms to deploy renewables. What we felt, as a state, mainly obviously the government which published this decree of laws, was the need into 2022 and January to make some alterations regarding the legal framework, namely to adjust the administrative mechanisms, getting some focus on the network development plan, and introduce some market-driven mechanisms also in the activities of the electrical system. Also some aspects regarding the active participation of consumers, and trying to looking at the implementation of these power plants and trying to get some new realities as re-equipment or hybridization and storage. But as you are seeing, sometime along the way, and probably much more focus regarding what has been the conflict regarding Ukraine and Russia, the droughts and the prices of energy have these consequences, and we try to adjust also these legal mechanisms. So some would say that this could be faced as legal instability. What we feel is the trying to implement much more measures, trying to simplify some administrative mechanisms to try to deploy as fast as you can these energy power plants, and this has been the focus, namely regarding the other decree of law from April that try to adjust some issues regarding the environmental studies, also some issues regarding the put into exploration these installations. So trying to speed up and ramp up this deployment of these installations. And finally, we have the decree of law of 72 from October that tries also to making some regime of compensation regarding to municipalities. So these issues could be much more adequate with the need to deploy faster projects. So this is in Portuguese mainly what has been these comments. Just to skip up very fastly, and regarding the last measure and going back or coming back to the offshore, most of you would say, well, this legal framework is not very specific regarding the offshore technologies. I would say that legal framework is very neutral regarding technologies, but regarding offshore, there are some issues that have been put in place in this decree of law, which is not very traditional in terms of legislation. That is trying to put in place some technological free zones that trying to being some like sandboxes to experiment some technology. So also this decree of law tries to develop these concepts. So this is the decree of law from April and from October. So to conclude, and using my last 4 minutes, what we want to show you is indeed the commitment regarding our transition, energy transition intentions are indeed the same. Mostly we are trying to review in terms of so we can ramp up these deployments. This has been shown, our compromise and our commitment, trying to, along the way, to adapt our legal frameworks so we can adjust this deployment. We are still facing some, we would say, some issues, namely onshore regarding grid capacity, but we are trying, obviously, to solve these issues. No, they are not easy issues to resolve because they have impact, namely on the consumers' tariffs. But we are also trying to look at 2 other places to deploy this energy strategy. Namely, last year we had a solar auction in our how do you say, dams? Well, you could also say, we could say that 200 megawatts in this technology, in the overall context, can be few megawatts, but in this it's a compromise, it's a measure, and is being deployed. What we are trying to look at now, and the government has been trying to push, is trying to look to the offshore and trying to look where can we develop this national energy and climate plan, but also to complement it with the national plan for sea that also brings some issues regarding this dynamization regarding the energy production. For this matter, the government established a working group that will try very simply to establish where are the areas that can develop generally these activities, namely basically trying to, in these locals, trying to generate the maximum information that could be possible for the promoters, so we can have much information for the development of this activity, but also trying to, in these locals, also have a strategic environmental evaluation, so we can decrease the risk of the implementation of this project. So first question, first issue, where? Also the issue of when will we deploy all these intentions of implementing about 10 gigawatts of energy generation. So not only when we will start, but also when can we deploy all this implementation, and how? Through auctions, as we are being, as we have some experience since 2019, or other mechanisms to deploy some of these experience. And finally, a public consultation regarding the free technological zone. We're just trying to zone the localization of this installation. Obviously, some of you, obviously the sector, already know very deeply what are the conditions for this installation, but it's the measure. Once again, one practical example of this commitment and trying to deploy as much as we can all of these objectives that we're trying to build. So I hope that I could mainly pass the message that we have a national plan, some commitments, that our legal framework is trying to adapt as much as we can to these challenges, and making some examples regarding what is being made to really implement these measures. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Filipe. Well, thank you very much for the overview of what Portugal is doing regarding moving into the offshore space, mainly with the wind technologies initially, and the other ones that will also follow, which will be with a great contribution to the baseload in Portugal. So now, what I would recommend and suggest is, I have a couple of questions here. I will start from Ricardo up to José Pinheiro, and I will give you the opportunity of each one of you answer the question first, and I will ask you the same question to have 4 points of view to the subjects that you are going to approach. So, what I would like to ask you initially is, do you think that the ambition for offshore wind in Europe, mainly for 2030, that came out stronger from the REPowerEU, is a strategy that it's good enough? And can you comment on what you think about the targets that were announced here today? Both Carmen and Filipe mentioned that Spain is envisaging 4 gigawatts and Portugal 10. Can you give us your views on this? And do you think that this is enough for what we need to do regarding REPowerEU, not only for environmental and economical purposes, but also for energy independence since the war in Ukraine started? Ricardo, I will start with you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with this excellent panel of colleagues. I think that objectives, they of course allow us to have a guidance and to push into the right direction, but I think they only serve the purpose if they can be achievable, and in the particular case of renewable and energy transition, if they can come by the end of the decade, because that's what the planet needs.
Adrian, can you share your views on the targets and what do you think about them in terms of setting the, let's say, the goal bar to what do we need to move until 2030?
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. I would like to make 3 points. I think an objective or target, by definition, it needs to be achievable, but it also it shouldn't be too easy to achieve. Otherwise, it's not ambitious enough, and obviously it's not a target or objective. So I think in order to analyze the targets, in Spain is 1 to 3 gigawatts by the roadmap, and here is 10 gigawatts in Portugal. We need to assess what's happening in the landscape in Europe. Mm-hmm. So we have targets 5 gigawatts in Ireland by 2030, 50 gigawatts in the United Kingdom, 20 gigawatts in France, 3.5 in Italy. So we need to compare that with the countries in our environment. So in our own opinion, from Iberblue, from a Portuguese perspective, 10 gigawatts is an ambitious target. From a Spanish perspective, 1 to 3 gigawatts, that could be more ambitious, but of course, it's an important step to start from. I think the other part of the target, you have a number and a capacity, and you have a timeline, which is very important. So we are very much focusing on 2030, because of course that's the next milestone. That's very important, but we need to provide also a roadmap for what's going to happen in 2040, what's going to happen in 2050. We need to provide a roadmap for society, but also for us, for developers, in order to basically push our project project ideas forward, not only for 2030, but beyond 2030.
Thank you, Adrian. Pablo?
Yeah, thanks as well for the invitation here, and congrats for the organization. Yeah, well, I do agree with Adrian. No? Targets should be achievable, and we've seen that right now I think for Europe is 450 gigawatts by 2050 and around 200 by 2030. It's ambitious, it's optimistic, and gives the right message to the industry. But as well, these targets should be aligned, and should be come together with fast regulations. And I think that well, in another forums like COP27, COP27, they are like pushing for a fast track regulation, etc., to make these targets achievable. So that's super important. Targets is the willingness, and we right now have to put the tools in place just to make it possible. Yeah, but well, just talking about Spain and Portugal targets, more specifically, well, the targets of Portugal, I think 10 gigawatts are great. Is something that will give to the investors some confidence, in the industry, and they have they can play the long term, and they can do like considerable investments with a healthy portfolio of these projects. For Spain, 1 to 3 gigawatts. I would say that we have to target the 3 gigawatts by 2030, just for making like an industry, from this 7 years remaining, 8 years remaining until 2030, to have like a stable, healthy pipeline of projects, offshore projects, so developers and as well the constructors, the supply chain can make their business plans with more certainty. Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. José Pinheiro, your turn.
Good morning. The beauty of being the last one, right?
Yeah, then you're going to be the first one in the fourth question.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much to WavEC and to Professor António Sarmento for organizing this year's seminar. I think the targets are quite okay in terms of being ambitious. I don't think we need to set targets that are achievable. Otherwise, it will be that means that we will have been probably not as bold as we should. So I think what we need to see is that there is a path to these targets that the EU has set, coming before in a situation of emergency, climate emergency, then the Fit for 55, right, with the COVID situation and the resilience umbrella setting new goals, and then afterwards the situation in Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine, setting more the tone of self-sufficiency. So I think that it's pretty much the tone, setting the tone for EU from Brussels. Another thing is then the goals. This is as I say, the tone and setting a vision. Then the countries need to translate this into their own targets and their own action plans, because I think it's more important than talk about the action plan towards that. Portugal has announced 10. It's just still an announcement. It's not yet carved in stone. It's also important to see how is that 10 giga going to be tendered and awarded, and 1 to 3 giga probably can be seen next to the 10, right? Can be seen a little bit of shy, but I think it's quite okay for the fact that we are also targeting offshore floating wind. We are not going for bottom fixed, so I think the targets need to be seen also from that perspective, and it's good to be ambitious.
No, thank you. That's what's going to take us to the next question, exactly, because what we know by now is that the majority of the deployment until 2030 for offshore wind will be floating. At least that's the information we have so far. And of course, we are moving into a new challenge in terms of the amount of power we need to install. And basically, what I would like to address, with the question now, and I will start with Adrian first, is What do you think are the main challenges when you are looking at this set of goals in terms of the development, the construction, and the operation and maintenance? And from what you can see today with the information available, what are your main risks and bottlenecks for this to be overcome, make it bankable, and make sure that we can actually deploy this by 2030, 2032? To me, that's more or less the same. Adrian, I will start with you now.
Of course, thank you very much. So I think in terms of answering this question, we need to have a very clear overall objective. What is the overall objective? Is to deploy as much capacity of floating offshore wind as possible in the shortest amount possible in a commercial and environmentally friendly way. That is the overall objective. So in order to achieve that objective, we need to look at each of the phases of the development and construction of a floating wind project. Starting by the first phase, which is getting a lease for your project. I think there is very important to have a clear framework. That is achieved by having a clear marine spatial plan with clear areas where offshore wind projects can be developed, a clear process of how these areas are allocated, and of course also to have a clear and as fast as possible timeline for allocating these areas. So this is on the first phase. Once we have that done, then we go into the permitting phase. I think again it's very important to have a very clear regime of what is required for an environmental impact assessment, and then it's very important to have an efficient determination process. That requires, of course, the public authorities to be resourced up well enough to be able to, shorten those timescales as much as possible. So that's from the permitting point of view, and then if we go to the construction and installation and assembly, we are going to have very clear supply chain bottlenecks here, and I'm going to just name a couple. On the one hand, turbines. I mean, we only have mainly 3 offshore or 4 offshore wind turbine manufacturers. There's, it's not only Europe, it's, the whole world. It's a global supply chain, so effectively there's a clear competition for turbines. And on the, I'm just going to single out another aspects, of course, port space. Here we are talking about floating offshore wind. It's different to fixed offshore wind. The spacing that is required in ports and the characteristics of the port are different to fixed offshore wind. So if we look at the floating offshore wind gigawatts for 2030 just in Europe, we can see that we don't have enough. We don't have enough space. So we of course need ports to be ready, and for us developers to work with the supply chain, of course, so that they are ready. And of course we need collaboration between developers as well to make sure that we don't go to the same port at the same time to basically deploy our project. So that's more or less what I wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Adrian. Pablo, your point of view on this one.
Well, Adrian said it all, so that's fine. I do agree with you, obviously, in everything. Just to emphasize, some points of your speech is like we do need to make sure that when we are doing this legal framework, these regulations, they don't have crossing messages with other Real Decretos or laws that can create bottlenecks. That's something in Spain that we need, for example, to take care of. Is not only to release the Real Decreto for this type of electrical generation, is as well to make sure that it doesn't conflict with others from the past. With the supply chain and ports as well, you said it, we have a big challenge there, but I see it as well more as an opportunity for these ports that they are not yet fully developed, or they have a lot of capabilities that they can expand. here a bit of shameless promotion, no? In Capital Energy, we do work a lot with ports, and we are always trying, no? to make the projects not just a renewable energy project, as well as socioeconomical project that can help to develop the areas, no? And that's something that as well port supply chain should take, should get it, no? And to work together with developers in the supply chain. Another challenge that maybe, I don't know if you mentioned it, the grid connection points. That's super important. I think that we will discuss a bit later on that. And personnel as well, the skilled personnel from both sides of the fence, no? From developers, as well from the supply chain, and obviously from regulators, no? That at the end of the day they will need to make their due diligence, no? Of these projects, and to choose which one is environmentally acceptable, no? And has like a good technological solution. I think with that, no? Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. Back to you, and can you give us some emphasis on the construction challenges that you had, also on some of the O&M challenges you are facing now with the project in Vienna?
Okay, so well, first of all, the challenge, the main challenge first is to actually put out there a regulation that makes sense, right? A regulation that articulates the sea, the access to maritime spatial planning that is well defined, how do we interconnect these projects within those areas, and demystify a little bit the topic of full occupation of those areas that will be defined. It's not going to be really like that, and the access to the grid, and plus the business model. Pretty much what Carmen explained with the three pillars and the business model around this, and how to fully analyze proposals from also a qualitative perspective. The challenges in terms of construction are clear, and our Secretary of State of the Sea in the beginning was very synthetic and to the point. There's only a way of, throughout collaboration, regional collaboration, to get infrastructures for installation and for assembly of wind turbines, and for manufacturing and assembly of the floating platforms. It's a bottleneck. We all know that. We will also be competing with bottom fixed. We all know that there are only a few ports able to. So again, it's a strategy. Should the state of Portugal or Spain take it in, or should they deliver it to the ports to do another business model? But in any case, it needs to be thought and decided, right? Not so much with regards to O&M. Operation and maintenance normally don't require that. It's not as demanding, logistically speaking. There are different models of operating a wind farm, but it's not an issue. But we need to see this as an entire package, right? So the main challenge for me it is not the infrastructure. It is an issue, but I think it can be dealt. The access to the supply chain, I think it has a lot to do with the ability of a developer being also able to get slots and to make their movements in that sense. Most probably the biggest bottleneck will be licensing and permitting. We have seen this we have an opportunity as well to because we are not multiplying dozens and hundreds of power plants. We have big power plants but less power plants across the ocean. But there's a really good opportunity there to simplify things from the beginning, from now, thinking ahead, and simplify the access to the areas, so that the permitting can be faster. There's a lot of things to do. It's not only drawing the laws, it's also the adaptation of our national institutions to be to be robust enough. And I believe you, Pedro, have been defending a lot that, and I also think it's critical. It's not a matter of the law being poorly written. I think we have good examples in Portugal and in Spain of how things are being translated into national laws from Brussels to the countries. That's not the problem. The problem is really the adaptation, the capability to accommodate another magnitude of permitting. We've been doing a good job, but I think the numbers ahead of us that we just talked before entail that the permitting processes will be in another level of it's another league.
Thank you. Ricardo.
Not much left to say.
There are still a few things.
But again, I would like to reinforce the 2 points where Andreas started discussion that for me are clearly the biggest bottlenecks to the development of optimized, fully functional, sustainable, renewable projects. So it's maritime planning, access to exclusive rights to develop, build and operate these projects, and then again, permitting and consenting has to be there, and those are the tools that we need to develop these projects.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Maybe we can talk about the stakeholder management, no? And how the impact on the social aspect of the projects. No?
If you guys want a minute each to go through the stakeholder management, please give us your thoughts on. We can start with Ricardo.
Yeah, I think that's part of pure project development. Every project is a project. You cannot manage everything for a country, for a region, so you really have to go into details, understand very well where you can add value to the local economy, how can you integrate that with your project development, project construction and project operation, and you have to manage and find compromises whenever there is conflict on the usage of the marine space by creating innovative ideas and trying to integrate the socio-economical environment around the project into the project and making it a part of it. But as I said, this cannot be generic, it has to be
project by project basis.
For each project and for each situation and for each culture, and I think there's nothing we can generalize on that, at least on my perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Ricardo. Adrian, you want to mention stakeholders management?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I completely agree with that. Perhaps from our perspective, I think the recipe for success is dialogue as much as possible, as early as possible. Because when you're at the early stages of development of a project, that's where you can change, you can dialogue, you can understand what the concerns.
Sorry, but when you mention inform and dialogue, should be the promoters or the governments announcing?
The promoters. The promoters, of course, should lead this dialogue with the local stakeholders, the local communities, understand what the concerns may be, and of course feed that back into the design of the project, because when you do that early, you have the opportunity to change that design. When you do that later, it
becomes a constraint.
Yeah.
Pablo, you want to mention something about the stakeholders management?
Yeah, I agree with them. Early engagement is key. Just to point out something different in the conversation now is, I think that the government should as well be involved in the stakeholder management. We've seen some regions and some countries where there are like some forums, that they get together like every couple of months, and you have people from another industry, supply chain, local authorities, regulators, and that creates a healthy forum now where everyone is present, not just like some part of the players, no? And I think that as well for us, for developers, sometimes it's difficult to reach the people, who is going to be involved, and that facilitates us the work, and I think is more like all together. Let's want to make it possible and try to take on board all the suggestions from everyone. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you. You want to add anything to this?
This is all very nice when you have rules already put across the table. When you don't, then I think the early engagement needs to be very thoughtful, because then it just creates noise. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. So let's move from the challenges to one of the main, let's say, pillars of this offshore approach, which is the grid access and how to bring power from the generation to land. How should we design this infrastructure? Who should pay for it? How should it be structured? I will start with you, Pablo. What are your ideas on this?
Thanks. Yeah. Well, that's the tricky question. Yeah, about the grid connection. We are seeing it not only in Portugal and Spain, as well in all the countries in Europe. It's always like a tricky thing. We've seen some models where the TSO is more involved and actually is designing and installing let's wanna say the offshore transition assets, like for example the export cable substation, and obviously all the onshore parts like the onshore substation and etc. No, we've seen another models like the UK one that is more on the size of the developer, no, and they need to do this investment, this design, and later they transfer to the grid operator. I mean, from my point of view, it could be a mix. It's something that we need to work together. Timeline is really important, and if the TSO has not the capabilities to design and install in a timely manner, it could be quite messy, no? With loss of profit in a massive investment. So, for example, from capital energy point of view, I would leave more of this way of installing these transfer assets to the developer, just because we can manage the risk and we can manage the timeline of the installation, etc. But as well, if with conversations with the TSO we can share this risk and this price, I mean this cost, that would be as well well received. It depends on how well prepared is all of the sizes and what is agreed. Who is going to pay for it at the end of the day? I mean, if we don't have to fabricate and install these assets, obviously we can offer a lower tariff, but at the end of the day, the other assets will be like installed by the government or by the TSO operator, and this cost will be as well reflected somehow in the tariff. Or
it will always be reflected.
Exactly,
it just depends
on
which part of the
exactly.
tariff.
So we are happy to take this hit. Just because of risk management and timeline management. Yeah.
Thank you, Pablo. José Pinheiro.
It's a false question, right? It's a non-question.
It is a start of an initial question. It's even the working group that was defined by the government. One of the tasks is actually to understand the grid model.
Indeed, and it's quite
and the financing of that grid.
And it's quite legitimate. And it makes sense. At the stage that we are, it's definitely it's not very important. It's crucial, fundamental that the TSO is involved in the design, and because themselves can see the amount of capacity that needs to be, that producers will come in a 10-year plan. They know the technicalities and they can see clearly the bottlenecks. So from a technical perspective, they are crucial. Who's paying the bill at the end of the day? It's always the consumer. At least in Portugal, we have 3 parcels to the cost:
tariff,
energy, grid, and general interest, economic costs, and taxes. So it's more a political decision than anything else. Technically, we could see that renewables onshore have been developing a lot of the grid and the reinforcements. We can do that as well. That's not a problem. The fact is that, as Pedro said, the cost, our offer at the end of the day will not be as competitive. That eventually can create a a false message of floating wind being even more expensive than what it is. So we need to be careful with that.
Before I hand over to Ricardo, the question that I have there is, whatever we do, it's one Iberian market, and on both sides we need to do the same, otherwise the way we calculate levelized cost of electricity is going to be different. And if the market design changes, then we are competing from a different basis, and then might create a complete misunderstanding on how to manage the power market in Iberia. Ricardo, over to you.
Yeah, I think the question, if I understood it correctly, is how you see it working better.
It's the grid access, because it's still under discussion, and we are not sure who should be responsible for it, who should design it, pay for it, and how it should be done.
I think I understood it correctly. So just I explained how the system works in Portugal, so there's no need to head on to that. We, as a company, we believe that the market is driven by regulatory frameworks which are clear and by viable projects, and not by targets, because targets, they are very vague and they are normally very big, and it's very difficult to understand within those targets which ones are viable targets and which ones are not viable targets. And of course, for the grid operator, it's very difficult to plan the investment, to plan where is it going to be, what it is the capacity, and how can we cope with those targets. That's why we believe that this should be driven by the projects, and it's such a critical piece that should not decide the viability of a good project or not. And in that context, I would answer to you, I believe that this should stay within the developer, the promoter scope, as it happens in the UK, the largest offshore wind market in the world.
Thank you, Ricardo. Adrian, yours.
Not that much to add, to be honest. I think when answering this question, we need to balance two things. One is risk, and the other one is speed of delivery. So, if the developers take the responsibility, they take more risk, but they are also in control of the speed of delivery. If the TSO does that, it's the other way around. And just to agree with Ricardo, I mean in the UK, the biggest offshore wind market, there's a proven system that is the OFTO system, where the developer designs and builds the transmission system, and then that asset is sold back to the TSO. That is let's say a hybrid system that has been working well in the UK. So I think, why should we reinvent the wheel if there's already methods that have worked in other countries?
Well, thank you for that. We are moving into our last questions, and it's your time to speak first, so everyone has the chance to speak first. We've all been seeing different models, and just to give an introduction, offshore wind can play two major roles. It can play more, but it can play two major roles. We can talk about power to X projects, or we can talk about the base load on an electrical system. So what I have heard in all of the wind associations is that stabilization mechanisms for project development are required, which means it's not about feed-in tariff, it's about contracts for difference. And what do you think should be the model, and how should the support mechanisms to cash flow stabilization should work? Should this be done on a completely on-market basis? Do you think Iberia needs to put out CFDs? And again, it's the same electricity market, so we need to be aligned. What is your opinion on this?
For the time being, of where we are in terms of offshore floating wind economics, it's critical to have the longer, the bigger tenor as possible of a mechanism that retributes the electricity produced. And that doesn't mean that it's subsidized at all. It's just CFDs, two-way CFDs are very common. Again, it's not inventing the wheel, and could be a way forward. We have demonized
feed-in tariffs.
And now we can see
Look where they are taking us now.
The great example of the special regime of production of renewables in Portugal, with a very clear cap and top prices, which are saving multi-millions of euros to the taxpayers. So, yeah, it's important. I think power to X, it's something that will happen, but it's something on a longer term, because I fail to understand who is going to buy power from offshore floating wind when they can buy from onshore sources at much more cheaper prices. So, yeah, it's important to have.
So you think we need the CFDs?
Yes, I do believe that we need CFDs. When we hear about PPAs out there, it's also the same thing. I fail to understand who is going to buy a PPA from floating wind when they can buy from solar or from onshore wind. So it's a bit difficult. It doesn't mean that it's the moment, it's the way we believe things should be, and that we see this replicated across Europe, the States, etc., etc. So.
Well, just to make it clear, and without making any, let's say, propaganda, and I will thank Antonio for allowing me to say this, but actually renewables save the consumers 2.6 billion just on overgains, because the feed-in tariff, the top of the cap and floor is 90, and the last resource trader is trading that power, and that money is coming back to consumers and to all the electrical system. But again, Ricardo, your turn, just to make this. Thank you.
Okay. Good. It's good because it's a totally different perspective, as one could imagine from my former colleague, José. We believe that both fixed bottom and floating are mature technologies that can be deployed commercially right away. We believe that they have advantage towards other renewable technologies, meaning the capacity that can be generated, and of course they can be competitive in the open market, and that's why we believe that we can survive without special schemes and just by going into the market and competing with all the other technologies, being those solar or even other technologies that are not renewable. So we did that back in 2012 with the project that BayWa built in Seville. Don Rodrigo was the first subsidy-free project in Europe. So we believe that in Portugal we have conditions to repeat that with the floating technology. So.
Thank you. Adrian, your turn.
Very interesting question, and I'm going to agree with José on this one. I think, the premise, again, as in previous question, let's not reinvent the wheel. Floating offshore wind is a technology that is still being matured at the moment. Let's remember that the biggest floating wind farm currently operational is now in Scotland with 50 megawatts only. And it is still a technology that is being matured. So if we compare it with fixed wind, probably floating wind is 5 to 10 years later, less advanced than fixed wind. So if we look at fixed wind has been supported by CFDs very successfully, and it has achieved two purposes. One, giving security of investment to developers, and two, driving the costs down due to competition. The costs have been going down for the last 10 years very, very successfully. So in Iberblue's own view, why should we reinvent the wheel? We should apply exactly the same mechanisms that we have applied with fixed offshore wind in order to give that security to offshore wind developers, and also I am sure that due to that the cost will be driven down up to a point where basically we can do it in the same way as fixed wind, that we are now seeing projects that basically are open to market prices.
Thank you. Pablo.
Yeah, well, not too much to add. Yeah, I'm between two views, no? The merchant view and the CFD. Obviously, with market prices nowadays, you can go to merchant, but this is hopefully not going to be like
financeable. It's not going to be financeable.
Yeah, as well, and we need like a stable regime now for 20-25 years, so you can go to the banks, financial institutions, and they have some certainty and security, no? For basically invest. Yeah, I don't know.
Just for the sake of clarity, these are not special things. This is common, subsidy-free remuneration to the electricity generated. So it's pretty clear. It's very, very balanced, to be honest. So it also takes into account the reference of the market of that day. So it's very competitive and very transparent on a way. And of course, we cannot put in the same discussion bottom fixed and floating.
Yeah. So for our last question, I would invite Carmen to come back on stage just for 3 minutes, because I would start with Filipe now, and since we are going through COP27, I would like to ask to each one of you, what are your 3 main expectations of outcomes from COP27 in terms of, for our sector, not only as offshore wind, but also as renewables, your 3 main, let's say, to-do lists or likes or ambitions that you would like to see out of the COP27, and I will start with you, Filipe.
So, obviously, we have to put this in consideration, because in Portugal we have been very sensible regarding this trying to change our energy policy. Obviously, nowadays we can say we are using the energy transition for climate purposes, but in the beginning it was much more simpler than this, with just energy dependency for fossil fuels. So since this beginning, trying to change our market has been our main purpose. So trying we do not see much change in terms of energy policy, in terms of implementation or of new targets, but maintaining just in the same horizon, on the same vision, or maintaining the same purpose of completely decarbonize the economy. So I think that there hasn't been a moment that we change our vision. I would say from at least from 2005, 2009, when we had the first wind turbines auctions. Since then, our trajectory was focusing mainly in decarbonization. And what we are trying to do, and obviously very oriented by these compromises, not only European but much more international, namely the COP, is trying to diversify and trying to explore other means of producing energy, namely using other territory that onshore we are feeling a lot pressure in terms of ground usage, but obviously as a country that has a huge potential in terms of exploring the maritime resources, and a history very connected with this resource, trying to implement and trying to go offshore and trying to grab this as, and allow me to the audience, trying to be the first mover, because indeed this 10 gigawatt is very ambitious, but we are trying to face this challenge as we did in 2009 when we tried to develop 2009 when was the auction, because the wind cluster I think started very early on. So we are trying to trying to push the same way as we did previously when we developed wind onshore, and we're trying to develop obviously the same way in offshore.
Thank you. Carmen, your 3 takeaways that you'd like to see in COP27 outcome?
Well, in Spain has already started the first steps to achieve our objectives, and now we are working in a lot of ways. We expected that at the end of the year we have the Maritime Spatial Plan, so we will be able to have the zones where we can install offshore wind and waves and tidal projects. And we hope for this energy transition, we are start to work for the framework, the subsidies, and we have forums with different groups like fisheries to achieve the objectives that we have for targets.
Thank you.
Can I just add up another consideration is that obviously in this context we feel that there is indeed a competition between states, but I think there is room for real cooperation, and one aspect in terms of opportunities indeed is the development of network between countries, and using some of these these European investments, namely the CEF, the Connecting Europe facility, for namely trying to develop the interconnections that are lacking, namely from, I would say, Portugal to Spain, but obviously from the Iberian Peninsula for European continent, because of the bottleneck. So this aspect, I think it's a huge opportunities, and I think this offshore sector will be able to also to transport to the implementation of this objective.
Thank you. Ricardo, your 3 main takeaways you would like to see at COP27?
Yeah, as said, we believe that what's blocking the fast acceleration of the industry as a whole, at least in our perspective, is again lack of clear regulatory framework for maritime planning. Define the areas, and this is in the states to do it, and then of course a fast track permitting and consenting process that allow fast deployment of large scale renewables, including offshore wind, both fixed bottom and floating. That's what we believe it's needed at the moment. Everything else, I just think it's complicated and reinventing the wheel, as the colleagues have been saying.
Thank you, Ricardo. Adrian.
Yes, I'll be very concise. I think one of the things that I would like to see as an output of COP27 is legally binding targets. There's lots of targets always at the end of these conferences, and no one does anything. So I think if we were to achieve something binding, I think that would be a good achievement. I think we come from the offshore wind sector, and I think offshore wind is a global technology. So I would like to see a recognition of offshore wind as one of the key elements of the decarbonization journey globally. And I think looking at where COP27 is happening this year, I would particularly like a plan for lower income countries, and how with help from higher income countries they can also achieve their own targets in the decarbonization journey.
Thank you, Adrian. Pablo.
Yeah, well, more or less the same as them. I think that something that was mentioned in the COP27 was to basically define these offshore projects as a public interest, to fast track, as Ricardo said, the permitting and licensing process. That could be a way, and well, and we can reinvent a bit the wheel, and I think that's a good path, if we can basically define these projects as a public interest for Europe and fast track the permitting.
Thank you. You close.
Yeah, fortunately, Glasgow was a bit of a failure.
Yep.
The only thing that, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but what was maintained there at least was the they didn't drop the 1.5 degrees Celsius target compared to pre-industrial phase. So I would say I would be humble and probably not too ambitious that at least 3 things that were not achieved in Glasgow could be achieved now. That indeed coal-reliant countries which did not adhere to the phase out of coal, and even saying that they would go using coal beyond 2040, which is, and in the existing context today, it could be even worse to tackle that one. So all the best in the true meaning of the word for that. The other one, that we also failed to have financing instruments so that underdeveloped countries could also access adaptation funds foreseeing the impacts of climate change. We failed that as well, unfortunately, last year. And the other one, it's a transparent scheme where accountability starts to be also, and it's very tough to get that, because then it will be a lot of finger pointing, unfortunately. But it will bring the next COP28 in the Emirates with a clear report saying who did what and how much they actually spent on CO2, let's put it like that, and the key indicators clear so that everyone understands where we are and not just a rough idea worldwide basis.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. I would like a round of applause to our panelists and to our speakers. We finish our panel here. Thank you very much.